Depending on who you ask, electric motorcycles are either pretty neat if you're into it and they're a thing you can go buy, or they are very quickly contributing to the death of the motorcycling industry and slowly sucking the passion out of everything we know and love about the two-wheeled sport. This is me editorializing here, but there seems to be an unhinged kind of hatred to a lot of the electric bike stuff online. But the thing is, they're not entirely wrong. There are some genuine reasons why you may want to avoid an electric motorcycle, and we're going to go over some of those today. However, because this is my show, we're going to include some reasons why you may actually want to consider adding one of these to your garage, because there are some that people don't consider. But let's start out by throwing some red meat to the base, as they say. Electric motorcycles simply do not have the range of a normal ICE bike. Let's take, for example, this S2 Mulholland right here from Livewire. This thing claims a 95-mile combined highway and city range. Now, I am super familiar with this platform. I've ridden the S2 Alpinista, the Del Mar, and the Mulholland for hundreds of miles across the entire family. And me personally, I have yet to hit that 95-mile range. When it comes to one of these motorcycles, you get out of it what you ask of it. So for example, let's say that you're out there riding a lot of highway miles, or you're in one of the more high power modes. You are gonna eat through the charge on one of these batteries a lot faster. Despite one of these things not having the range, they are so easy to just get on and ride. And I know that might blow some standard motorcycle riders' brains, but some people don't want to interact with a clutch. They don't want to be dealing with shifting gears. They just want to twist and go, and that is what one of these things is so good at. When it comes down to the Mulholland, if you have the key fob in your pocket and the kickstand up, all you got to do is push a button and you're ready to rock and roll. One of the things people don't mention is that the regenerative braking on a lot of these motorcycles is basically perfect trail braking around every corner without you having to think about it. Instead, you're just connected to the road because there's no vibration of a motor between you and the ground. You feel every bump, you feel every crack, you feel every wiggle from the tires. And because you're not listening to an engine roaring away underneath you, you're actually able to hear a lot of stuff going on around you. However, the flip side of that coin is one of the things that draws people to motorcycles is the sound. Motorcycles have some of the most iconic engine sounds out there, whether it's the Harley single crank pin 45-degree air-cooled V-twin or the screaming inline four. There are some sounds that no matter where you hear it, you instantly know it's a motorcycle. And no matter what an electric bike tries, they just kind of all sound the same. Now, it is true that there is some difference in the way that they sound. For example, the Energicas have tuned their motors to be loud and whine and really sound like you're getting after it. And the Livewire, it's a little bit more tame. However, for the average guy or gal out there, they're not gonna hear a difference. I'm sorry. Also, there's no joy of getting to put an exhaust system on your electric bike and getting to hear how it sounds when you open it up. That's actually one of the things that's the most fun when you buy any new bike, is getting an exhaust to put on there and getting to hear it finally for the first time as you leave a red light and do that pull and then get pulled over by the cops. That's not to say that there are no mods that can be done to these bikes though. One of the coolest things about electric bikes is you can download new features directly to your bike. A really great example is this Livewire right here. When I got it, it did not have roll forward regen, which means that you could use the cruise control kill switch by rolling the throttle forward to activate regenerative braking. I was able to download that directly to the bike off of a flash drive. And they gave that to every Livewire S2 owner for free. Also, this thing didn't have reverse mode when it left the dealership, and now it does. Also, that was free. There is some stigma out there, well earned, because Zero went and charged for some of the features that were already on the bike, even though in some cases it actually made sense. Now I'm gonna play devil's advocate for Zero here because I can see why they thought it was a good idea. Most batteries out there last longer if you only charge them to 80%. So what they did was when the bike came out of the factory, it was ready to go with 0 to 80, and you could pay to unlock 80 to 100. you were just also hurting the battery when you use that extended range. If I was in charge, I would have just had a button in there that allowed you to protect the battery and disable that top 20% instead of trying to sell it back to you later. But I can see where they were coming from with it. The general point though is that there are some really cool features that you can add to one of these motorcycles through software updates that you can't really do to an ICE bike without opening it up and adding a bunch of new stuff that is mechanically complex. Now, one of the things that's so nice about the roll forward regen on this bike is the folks at Livewire were smart enough to turn on this rear brake light whenever you get on it, because the bike starts slowing down as if you're using the regular brakes. How many times have you been out there on a motorcycle with a quick shifter and you've just auto blipped down a gear, used the engine to slow down, but you haven't lit up your rear brake lights? If you're anything like me, let's be honest, that's like 60 to 90% of the time that we use an auto blipper. That's why something like this is so handy. This is a brake-free helmet brake light, and it senses any form of deceleration, and it lights up, letting everybody behind you know that you've gotten on the brakes. It's got this high contrast mode here for daylight use. It's got a night mode with a running light, and then it has a hazard light for if ever you're in traffic or bad weather. But maybe you're out there thinking, Spite, that's cool and all, but I've got a white helmet like the one you're sitting next to. I don't want a black brake free. Well, it just so happens you're in luck. They've got a white one, and it only takes about a second to swap from one brake free light to the next. If you're interested in checking one of these out for yourself, click the link down in the description below where you can get $10 off by using the code SPITE. Again, click that link down in the description below where you can use the code SPITE for $10 off your order, and let's get back to it. Now, we can't talk about an electric motorcycle without talking about the downtime that comes with one of these motorcycles. It takes a long time to charge one of these bikes. For example, this thing right here can take up to 11 hours to charge, and that is way longer than your average sandwich break on a weekend ride. Now, charge time is one of those places we're seeing a lot of improvement. For example, Livewire had an S2 Alpinista at EICMA that featured DC fast charge, which was like 5 to 10 minutes to get this thing full. Once we see that on more of these motorcycles, I think that's going to solve one of the biggest issues with these bikes. However, we still have to talk about the charging infrastructure, which in the States is not quite there yet outside of some of our bigger cities. Now, one thing that basically every motorcycle has nowadays is customizable ride modes. But how many bikes out there can you point to that you can say, honestly, have 100 levels of power, throttle control, engine braking, customization? This thing right here does. You can dial the ride modes on here to be exactly how you want them. And that's not something you can say about all the rider modes out there nowadays. Sure, some of them, like my 210 660, have 3 levels of power delivery and a couple of levels of slide control. However, you can't go in and say, I want 46% throttle control, and I want 93% power delivery, and I want 62% regen. The granularity and customization of an electric bike is second to none, and there is no ICE bike that can compete. You could argue that you don't need all of that, but it's better to have and not need than need and not have. Speaking of needing and not having though, there is limited support for electric motorcycles in the United States right now. For example, I accidentally broke the blinker on the front of this motorcycle, that right one right there, which I've since fixed. I promise, Chris, I fixed it. I got a good one. I called my Harley dealer because this is technically a motorcycle produced by Harley Davidson. And I confused the hell out of the parts guy because he was like, you know, we're not a Livewire dealership, and I don't know who you're gonna be able to call if we can't get this part for you. To be clear, the part number on there is a Harley Davidson part, so you'd think you'd be able to call any Harley dealer, but you can't. It gets even worse if you're an Energica owner, because Energica has since gone belly up. Now, it's entirely true that a lot of those Italian motorcycles use the same components across Aprilia, Moto Guzzi, MV Agusta, and also Energica, so you're gonna be able to find parts for it. But let's say, for example, you have an issue with the software. What you gonna do? You're kind of screwed. The other side of that coin, though, is these bikes are incredibly low maintenance. For example, I'm trying to get rid of my DRZ 400 SM right now because I use it mostly as a dirt bike. And I don't go dirt riding all that often, which means it spends a lot of time sitting, and there's a carburetor in there which gets gummed up with gas because I don't run it every week like you need to with a carbureted bike. Ain't nobody got time for that, but I do have an electric dirt bike in there, and I haven't looked at it in months, and I pulled it out yesterday to check, and it's still working just fine. It goes back to that twist and go philosophy. This thing is just easier to ride and to own than a gas bike. That is assuming you can clear the final hurdle, which is price. Electric motorcycles, by and large, are very expensive. We have had some initiatives to try to make them more accessible. For example, Zero has their All Access initiative, which is trying to bring more electric bikes in at under 10,000 bucks. And we've seen Livewire slash the price on the entire S2 line for months. In fact, I think they're still on sale right now. At under $10,000, this is one of the best motorcycles you could spend your money on if you're looking for a bulletproof, easy commuter. But at the original list price, it's kind of expensive for what you get. However, if you're looking at a bike with a little bit more range, like the SRS, the SRF, the Livewire 1, or back when Energica still existed, some of Energica's offerings, those were all close to or over $20,000. And sure, maybe there are some EV incentives that you can take advantage of on your taxes and write them off or whatever, but you're still paying up front a big chunk of change for one of these motorcycles. And then again, if you're looking performance-wise, for the most part, you're getting more miles per dollar out of an ICE bike. I'll be very interested to see where some of Zero's bikes start landing with that All Access initiative, and I'm super interested to see the future of the S2 line after having this massive sale with up to like 6,000 bucks off of some of these bikes. And then the biggest positive about this is also one of the biggest misconceptions about an electric bike, and that is lifespan. Some people will see that there's only 500 to 1,000 cycles before the battery starts to deteriorate, but they don't do the math in their brain and think about how many of those cycles they're actually doing. Let's say, for example, you take me, who's getting roughly like 70 to 75 miles out of one of these charges, and I only have 500. Let's do the math on that real quick. 75 times 500. Is that 37,500 miles? That's more than most people do on their motorcycles. I'm sure that there's some iron butts out there that are like, I do that in a weekend. But the reality is most motorcycles see less than 1,000 miles a year. But it goes even deeper than that, because take, for example, Energica, which was rated for 1,000 cycles of DC fast charge. That means that you're only deteriorating the battery or using one of those cycles if you're using the DC fast charge, which puts more strain on the battery. So if you're just doing level 1 or level 2 charging at home, you're gonna get way more than that. And 1,000 cycles at 75 miles worth of range is 75,000 miles before the battery even starts to deteriorate. I've only seen one motorcycle in person that has close to 70,000 miles on it, and it is my VMAX at 72,000 miles, and it's from 1998. The number of bikes that actually see that kind of mileage is vanishingly small. It's a non-issue that some people are arguing about because these bike manufacturers have to report a number to the regulatory boards. Sure, there are definitely going to be some batteries out there that deteriorate faster because not all battery chemistry is identical, but I do not expect my Super Duke to ever get close to seeing 75,000 miles before I need to put a new motor in that bike. The reality is this S2 right here is probably going to outlive most of our ICE bikes. Just kind of the sad truth. Let me know all your thoughts down below, and I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.